number 5 of the money section. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari So, what I'd like to do, before we even get into today's verse, is just have a bit of a recall from yesterday's verse. We'll say Mangalacharya first, and then we can discuss. Jnanatimurandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Skapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, what I wanted to do is, so I'm thinking we have a lot of classes in the day, and so it's a lot to digest. So one thing that I think would help is that when we do these sessions that we'll begin with a bit of a recap, and that way it can help to strengthen some of the things that we've discussed, but also with a view towards practical application. Maharaja is here, so I'll just wait for Maharaja to take his seat as well. So this Candramauli Maharaj ki Jai. to request the blessings of Maharaja and my other seniors, all the devotees, so we can discuss further. So we've gone through the first 4 verses. Today we'll discuss number 5. But before we do, let's have that recap. So there were 3 key themes in yesterday's verse. What do you recall? Key themes.
Sound is the seed.
Yes, sound is the seed of psychology. Definitely. What was the other one?
Liberation does not give freedom.
Yeah, liberation does not give freedom, it's a trap. And the third one? Vaishnavas aim at Vrindavan or the Vaikuntha. Okay. And within that, because I think it's also useful to really think about practical applications. The sound is the seed of psychology, of our psychology. What was the key point there? Anyone recall? What were we saying about how our psychology is affected by sound? Yes. So what we hear. So we mentioned how Shravanam, Kirtan, actually Vishnu Smaranam, or Smaranam in particular, all of these things, it's a neutral process. What I've noticed in our communities is that we hear things but we often don't understand it. So sometimes even we've heard mundane talks, gossip, we should give it up. But it's not necessarily understood why. Or it's like it's bad for other people, it's not nice. But it's not understood that it's a watering process. So the devotee is like someone in a tug of war. You're in the center, you're being pulled by different ropes in different directions. On the one hand, material desires. On the other hand, spiritual desires. I was thinking this morning, even when you come to a retreat, what you often notice is you feel very Krishna conscious at the retreat. You know that experience? And it wears off very quickly once you leave the retreat. But one of the reasons for that is exactly this point. When we're in the retreat, we're not watering the material seeds. So what's happening is you have extensive hearing. So in this tug of war, on the one hand it's material desires, on the one hand it's spiritual desires. You come to the retreat, all of the spiritual desires are being watered through this Shravanam, Kirtanam, etc. So then in the tug of war, you find you're moving very easily in the direction you want to move in. And you think, wow, this is amazing. But then we go home. Right. And then it's the mundane talks, hearing and discussing. It's Shravanam on mundane things. And because it's a neutral process, it works spiritually, but it also works materially. So then we go back, and then we're watering something else, and no one's ever told us, actually that material discussion is not neutral. It's not neutral. It's watering the material desires. And so therefore we find ourselves getting pulled in the other direction and thinking, what's going on? Therefore the scriptures, they give the poverty and the nivriti. They give the poverty the things to do. They give the nivriti the things to avoid doing. Now, let's just add, I wanted to add one dimension to that, and that is that while we are in this world, we often have many different duties, different things that we need to do. Martin alluded to this yesterday. He was talking about, he was quoting the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, whatever you do, whatever you offer, they should be done as an offering unto who? Krishna. Right? So the scripture says, Smatavyam Satatam Vishnu. Always remember Krishna. Right? But it also says, never forget Krishna. So the always remember Krishna is the direct process of bhakti. The ninefold process, Nava Anga Bhakti, always remember Krishna. The never forget Krishna is the indirect. It's the things that we have to do in this world, do them in relation to Krishna. Right? Do them as an offering to Krishna. So we have to eat food. Okay, make the food as an offering. We have to maintain ourselves, we have to make a living. Think of how can I connect what I'm doing to Krishna. One way is even seeing the teachings in the workplace. So you may read something, so Krishna talks about people in different modes. So you may be in the workplace and you may notice, this person's in the mode of passion. You know? What does Krishna say about people in the mode of passion? He says they act like this, they do like this. So even though you're seeing something in the external world, you're remembering what the scripture says about it. Okay? You can think that I'm working, what do I do with the earnings from when I'm working? Not just the earnings, by the way, not just the money, the skills, the information that you learn. Right? So you may learn something in the workplace, I can use that in devotional service. So you can connect things to Krishna consciousness. That's the point. So the things that we do, that we have to do, we want to find a way to connect those things to Krishna consciousness. And in that way, it doesn't water the material, but it still brings us closer to Krishna. So this is the key point. And just really emphasizing that things aren't neutral. The mundane talks, and that includes mundane television, all these things, it waters something within us. And that's often why our devotional service is harder than it needs to be. And then some of you will have even lived in the temple. And you'll have noticed when you were living in the temple, you found it much easier to be a devotee because these other things weren't being watered. Very, very simple principle. But throughout the teachings, everything has its practical application. Everything has its practical application. Maybe we'll mention it now. So, in Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha, he talks about Praman. Praman is evidence. And he says, he actually lists 10, but then of the 10 he says, Vaishnavas we use 3. Does anyone know what those 3 Praman are? The 3 types of evidence that we use? Shabda is the first one, and then Anuman, and then the third one is Pratyaksha. Okay? So, this point about what's inferred by the scripture, that's Anuman, inference or logic. So you have the Shabda, you have the statements of the Shastra, then you have the Anuman, what's implied by that, what's the logic. So again, if we understand the reason why, what's implied by that, and we gave the example yesterday, Kali Yuga is age of what? Quarrel and hypocrisy, which implies that we're going to have disagreements. Right? So it's the statement and what's implied by the statement. If it's the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, it means people disagree a lot. And that's also implied is therefore, if we can learn how to deal with disagreements in a healthy way, we're in a good situation. We also spoke about the expectations of different devotees. If they're Kanishta, what does that imply about the behavior? They know how to deal with who? They have Kanishta Adhikaris have appreciation for the deity, right? But they don't necessarily know how to deal properly with the devotees. So what's implied by that? How should you expect them to deal with you? Very well? No. Again, implication. Right? The statement is there and it implies it means something practically. Yeah, so that's just something on that. Alright, so now what we'll do is we will go to verse number 5. And I've been informed by Sri Devi that there's a meter that we can use. Jatna asked to meter. So I'm just going through in my mind. Yeah, that works. Okay. So, what we will do is maybe I will do a line, and then if it's a car crash, then we'll just sing it together. Okay. Asachista kasta prata vikata pasa lipi aiha. Asachista kasta prata vikata pasa lipi aiha. Prakamam kalmati prakata pata pati vyaktikare. Prakamam kalmati prakata pata pati vyaktikare. Padvahanyeham iti pakapitvat mapagane. Padvahanyeham iti pakapitvat mapagane. Kuru tvam putkaram avati sayata tvam manaita. Kuru tvam putkaram avati sayata tvam manaita. Okay, so we'll go through the word for word. Iha. Here in this world. Prakata pata pati. Attackers of the sparkling path of devotion. Vyatikare, the mob. Prakamam, of hideous enemies. Kamadi, who are lust, etc. Gale Badva, binding the neck. Vikata Pashalibir, with dreadful nooses. Kasta Prada, troublesome. Asakchesta, of wicked endeavors. Hanye ham iti, I am being killed. Kurutwan, you cry out. Utkaran, piteously. Iti vakalpit vat mapa kane. Like this to devotees of Krishna, the killer of Baka. Manaha, of mind. Avati sa yata. So they will save. Twan, you. Itaha, from these enemies. Okay, so translation. So, Bhagwan Das Goswami states, while here on the revealed path of devotion, I have been attacked by the hideous gang of lust, etc., who have bound my neck with the troublesome, dreadful ropes of wicked deeds. I am being killed. Cry out piteously like this to the devotees of Sri Krishna, the destroyer of Baka. O mind, they will save you from these enemies. Okay. So, Kamadi. So, this translation, Kamadi, who are lust, etc. So it's actually referring to all the 6 enemies. All the 6 enemies of the mind: lust, anger, greed, envy, pride, illusion. And it's interesting, when Arjuna asked Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, what forces us to act even against our own best interests? And he says, Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, Rajaguna Samubhavam. Right? This Rajagun is there, this particular mode, and this karma, Kamadi, as being explained here, is the leader of the 6 enemies of the mind, actually. So, there's a term, Kam Anuja. The younger brother of lust is anger. Like that, they come together. So, there's a whole understanding here that when there is lust, and if there's an obstacle to that fulfillment of that lust, it creates anger. Right? So you want something, and something is getting in the way of what we want, therefore anger. But it works also, unfortunately, in the other direction. When the lust is satisfied temporarily, because it's never satisfied properly, when lust is satisfied temporarily, it leads to greed, which is another enemy. In fact, see, anger is an energy that allows us to push through to achieve what we want. So even though this is not mentioned in the 6, fear is also involved in this process. Because when the lust is there, I have some material thing that I want, and then I can't get it. Normally that creates anger. But if I can't get it because my strength is not greater than the obstacle, right? In other words, you want something from someone, but they're stronger than you are, right? So you're threatening them, and they threaten you back. They say, no, you can't do it. So then you feel fear. Because actually, the opposing force is stronger than your own desire for that particular thing. So, like that, these different enemies are there. But behind all the enemies, there's an even deeper root to those enemies. You see, the cause of lust is actually the desire to enjoy. So what's underneath that is, first I want to enjoy. Then lust relates to specific ways in which I want to enjoy. So again, the consideration is the teaching deals with this right at the root. It says, rather than trying to enjoy, we want to develop a mood of what? Service. If I can identify as a servant, And if I can let go of the spirit of trying to enjoy and cultivate a spirit of actually being a servant, you can uproot all of these 6 enemies. All these 6 enemies can be uprooted. Just by this one understanding. But it's something, again, to be cultivated. Because, as we said, not just what we hear, not just what we chant about, but also what we remember becomes stronger within the consciousness. So Krishna talks about this in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, one who gives up the activities of sense gratification but still meditates upon them within, he is a what? He's a pretender. Right? Because he's still watering, or she's still watering the exact thing that they're seemingly not doing. And in due course of time, by watering those particular things, those desires also become stronger. And at a certain level of strength, one will be forced to act upon those desires again. So again, the whole process, it works materially or spiritually. So, these 6 enemies are there, and it's also interesting that they lead in this place. Actually, let's read the exact point. It is said, these enemies have bound my neck with the troublesome, dreadful ropes of wicked deeds. Again, it's predictive actually. What we are doing is actually a reflection of the type of consciousness that we have. It's always the case. Whatever we're doing. And this point about this Kama Isha, Krodha Isha, Rajaguna Sabut Bhavan, this Rajagun is predictive actually. It's, again, it's not so well known, but the scriptures are predictive. And Krishna, when he's speaking about the modes, he explains their trajectory, the route that those modes go on. So he says activities in the mode of ignorance, in the mode of goodness, they first begin like what? They're poison. So you're going to have to do some work to begin with, but in the end they become nectar. So it's a trajectory. He explains that activities in the mode of passion, they begin like nectar. So it seems to be okay in the beginning. But the same thing that seems okay in the beginning actually causes so much distress later on. It's very, very interesting. There's a quote, well, I was just reading this yesterday. So Chanakya Pandit says, in old age, the liver ages, the teeth fall out, there's no more strength. He said, but our desires remain as strong as in our youth. My wife was reading 4th canto, and she shared that there's a statement by Prabhupada in 1 purple in the 4th canto. It says, the more that one enjoys illicit activities when they're young, the more they suffer when they're older. And it's to this particular point. Because it means that something's cultivated, but then the vehicle by which one tries to achieve that thing is now being destroyed. So you're trapped with all of these intense agitations and desires, but you have no means of fulfilling them. And that's the definition for torture. So this point, these desires within the heart, they are the wicked highwaymen. And it's talked about this shining path of devotion. Now, in his commentary, it is mentioned by Bhaktivinoda Thakur that these the devotees are like Krishna's police, their police force, Krishna. So when we take proper shelter of the devotees, they actually give us protection. We were in Vrindavan. Towards the end of last year, there was a retreat, a youth retreat. And as part of the youth retreat, we spent some time with Burijan Prabhu and his wife, Mother Jagatarini. So given some classes. And she said something very interesting. She talked about how she always tries to get the association of advanced devotees. And she says, even if I can't be around them too much, because maybe they're in the renounced soldier or whatever, she said, I try to be within their energy. Like that. Because the devotees actually carry a certain energy, a certain Shakti. And that energy also impresses upon us to the extent that we're open and receptive. So one type of association is that physical association. The other type of association is the instruction. Right? So Vani, Vapu, both things are actually wanted. There was one Prabhupada disciple when Prabhupada was preparing to leave the planet, Prabhupada told the devotees, you can all come and be with me. He was in Vrindavan. And this particular devotee, he was thinking about going, but he was told service in separation is higher. Right? So he didn't go. He regretted it, actually. Because Vani and Vapu both were important. If you can get the Vani, you should actually take it. But the reason why, if you can get the Vapu, you should also take it. The reason why Vani is considered superior is because it's there in all circumstances, whether the Vapu is there or not. You see, like that. He didn't take that association, and he feels, in hindsight, that he should have done it. So the devotees, their presence, it actually gives a flood of devotion. If we're receiving that, if we're receptive to that, whatever they carry in their consciousness, we have some opportunity to experience. In Nectar of Devotion, it talks about shadow ecstasy. That sometimes one may experience something just by being in the presence of a great devotee, and some of the spillover of their devotion comes into our experience. There was one devotee who was he was serving a well-known devotee in our movement. I won't mention his name, but he was serving this devotee in Vrindavan. And what happened was he actually saw the deity move in relation to that devotee. But because he was around that devotee, he experienced it as well. And he had that understanding that this is what that devotee is experiencing. But because I'm around them, I get to see or have some spillover from their own spiritual effect as well. So it really is like that. We actually exist in different dimensions according to our level of consciousness. So even, for example, devotees have Gauranitai deities. Actually, the degree to which the Lord manifests in that deity form is due to the degree of devotion of the person who comes before the deity. So the more someone is devoted, when they come before the deity, the Lord is more, oh, it's you. He's more active. So our devotion is like a magnet. Krishna's hiding, but like a magnet, it pulls him forward. And therefore we see him more in our own life according to that devotion as well. This is why the devotees and their presence is so important. So we have to also cry for their protection. But going back to the thing that Maharaj spoke about, we can't cry out to the Lord unless we feel a sense of humility. We can't cry out to the Lord unless we feel a sense of pridelessness. Because pride has a lot to do with thinking I can do it by my own strength. And humility is the opposite. Humility is that mood of dependence. It is that, it's an expression of Sharanagati actually. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in the Harinam Chintamani, he says surrender, Sharanagati is the Swarup Lakshana of the devotee. It's the primary characteristic, root. And he says all these 26 qualities of the devotee, they're Tatashta Lakshana. But it's most important, the root of it all is that we surrender. This verse echoes this point, dependence on the Lord's devotees. I've seen in my own life, so many times I had some idea or some thought, but when I would speak to my seniors, they would actually point something out to me that I had absolutely no access to. No access to. I had the darshan of one Shiksha Guru, and he actually was able to tell me something that was going on with me that I was even completely unaware of. Completely unaware of. So we are benefiting from the spiritual progress of others actually. We're benefiting from the spiritual advancement of the other devotees if we know how to take advantage of it. And to take advantage of it, it is the process of hearing, inquiring, etc. So we sometimes, you just read, but that's not enough because we need to, one of the reasons why it's not enough is because the scriptures are such that sometimes a particular subject is placed in many different places in the scripture. So by reading, you may understand one piece of the puzzle, but you may not know that there are other aspects of that same teaching in other areas, and when you bring them all together, it gives you a complete understanding. So reading is important, but it's not enough. We want to then hear. But then hearing is not enough. Why? Because there's gaps in our knowledge. Or we hear something, but the tendency is whatever I hear, I see it within my context. I may not see it in its full context. We were doing some outreach, and then there was one devotee who was speaking to me, and they pointed out, they said that, yeah, they feel that they can be very Krishna conscious by doing whatever they want to do for Krishna. And it's true, there's value to that. But where they were resistant was that Krishna says at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dhammam Parityaja, Mamekam Saranam Vraja, Ham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo, Moksha Yashyami Masucha. And Prabhupada says the final instruction is the most important, actually. The final instruction is the most important. It's complete surrender. So all these different stages are en route to that particular goal. And there was actually some resistance to the goal. So in good association, it's pointed out, yes, what you're doing is good, but this is a stage in the journey. It's not the goal. But it's a stage of where we may be, and we should do that and do it properly, but we should know where we're going as well. So this idea of reading is important, but then reading and hearing is important. Reading, hearing, and then inquiring. And therefore Krishna makes that point. Tatvidi pratena prasnena sevaya. Upetek shanti te jnanam jnaninas tatvadashana. You approach it, oh, if I spiritual master, but you don't just approach. You serve it and you do what? You inquire. To get a proper understanding, to see how all these pieces fit together. And then even then, we can strengthen or deepen our devotional samskars by also reflecting on these points. When I was looking at this section, it's very interesting. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he gives an explanation to a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and he explains how we give up these varshanas, right, these strong material attachments or material samskars. He said we can do it with the help of our mind. He says what we can do is mentally analyze material enjoyment and consider to ourselves what good will it give me ultimately. Right? Where will I end up if I continue in this particular space? Again, like we said, the trajectory. A particular activity, it carries us in a particular direction. I was asked to get involved in one project. And I was just looking at the individuals involved, and I could see there's just so much passion. And I knew if I get involved in this project, it would just be great in the beginning, but in the long term, it's just going to be really, really, it'll be intense. There'll be a lot of intense work like that. So again, these teachings are practical. You can see where something ends up by its mode, actually, by the trajectory of that particular situation. It's got this particular mode. Therefore, in the short term, it will be like this. In the long term, it's going to be like this. Is that where you want to go? Like that. Oh, so he says, yes, we can give up these varshanas with the help of our mind. He says, by doing so, we'll gradually force our intelligence to meditate on the pure soul, which is full of Satchidananda, and it will take that, it will take us away from sense enjoyment and meditating on the sense objects. Ramanujacharya also says something. He says, Ramanujacharya says we can give up enjoyment for sense gratification by reflecting on the fact that despite all of our efforts, whatever we gain, we'll never be able to hold on to. So, by that meditation, we can understand again what's the conclusion of what I'm doing. Like that. Actually, Chanakya says even something similar. He says you consider. Yes. So Ramanujacharya, he says we can give up enjoyment for sense gratification by reflecting on the fact that despite all of our efforts, whatever we are trying for materially, we will not be able to keep it in the end. The difficulty with the modern world is it doesn't create so much space for reflection. Yeah. So we hear and it goes in one ear, it usually comes out the other ear very, very quickly. But if we can take some time to reflect, and this is actually mentioned in scripture, manana, it strengthens the bhakti samskars. So if you read something and if you think about it, if you reflect on it, then you're reversing that process that causes us to become materially entangled. You're strengthening those bhakti samskaras, which again makes it easier to practice devotional service. It is a fact that for the vast majority of devotees in our movement, it's actually, they find it harder to practice devotional service than they should. And it's because of this watering process unconsciously. And watering, we read about this, right, the weeds, and then people don't know, but actually what's being done is actually making them stronger. And because they're becoming stronger relative to the devotional creeper, then it becomes a real tug of war, and actually we're being pulled in the wrong direction. But it's by the watering process. So what we meditate on, if we have this practice, as Ramanujacharya has given, as Baladev Vidyabhushana has given, if we do that watering process by reflecting on the devotional aspects, our philosophy, our practices, the instructions of the spiritual master, you make them stronger just by that process of reflection. It's a type of smarana. And in that way, you actually find it becomes more and more easy to practice devotional service, because when we first came, that's actually why it was so easy in the beginning. When we first came, it was like, wow, this is amazing, and then we just gave our full attention to some extent to that practice. And therefore we were just watering those devotional samskars, and we weren't watering the material samskars, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. I'm probably going to become pure in about half an hour, like that. There's enough time for lunch before we hit prema. But then we forget how this works. It's really important to understand why. Whatever we're doing, it's really important to understand why. And it's got to be a why that's compelling. A why that is compelling is a why that will cause you to follow it. Right? I could have told you in yesterday's class, you should give up mundane gossip because it's not nice. Probably most of you will think it's not a big deal. It's not nice, but it's not causing me any pain. I'm going to do it subconsciously, because we're devotees. But if you tell people this is what's making your spiritual life much harder, because you're watering the material desires, you don't know it, you don't realize it, but that mundane gossip and all those mundane activities that we expose ourselves to, unless we're actually doing it in connection to Krishna, we're watering the very thing that makes our spiritual life difficult, because that tug of war's going on. Then it's like, wow, I'm the cause of my own spiritual life becoming more difficult. And I have the power to stop making my own spiritual life more difficult than it needs to be. It's a different angle of the same thing. So, a few other points. So, this is interesting. In this verse, it is explained that cry out piteously like this to the devotees of Sri Krishna, the destroyer of Bhaka. So we mentioned how one methodology for overcoming anarthas is to study these pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan, where he kills those demons. If you hear about those pastimes, speak about those pastimes, reflect on those pastimes, it helps to remove that particular anartha. So Bakasura, anyone remember what type of creature he is?
Crane.
It's a crane, right? And Krishna actually kills him, right? Bifurcates, yeah? Like that. And the crane represents this, and Bakasura represents deceit. Yeah, like that. So here, and actually in the next verse, there'll be more focus on that point about deceit and hypocrisy, but that's verse number 6. But Bakasura represents deceit. And so these enemies cause us to move away from Krishna. Karmadi. Okay. And it's also interesting, even the way that this is translated. You will find in Prabhupada's books, how much?
Yeah, what is deceit in relationship to the six anarthas?
What's the question?
Do you know?
No, just a question. What is deceit in relationship to the six anarthas? Is it a sum total of all of them?
I think it's a sum total, but my understanding is that what happens is by those anarthas we're pulled away from what we actually know is the real nature of the soul. So we're actually pulled in the material direction, even though the soul, or as devotees, we're trying to move spiritually. So we're moving away from the path of devotion rather than towards the goal of devotion. But in the next verse, I think it goes on to a bit more detail about that.
Still not clear about what is deceit.
Yeah. So that's what I'm sure.
I mean, is it related to one or more of the anarthas?
I think it's related to all of them. Because what I read in the Bhajana Dharpana by Bhaktivinoda Thakur is that through lust all the other anarthas manifest, all those other 6 enemies manifest. So it's like lust, he says lust is like a leader of those other particular anarthas. And then when it mentions the ropes, it talks about how the ropes are pulling us away from that particular path. So he says that like highwaymen take us away from that.
Deceit is like self-deception, isn't it? Take something that is not actually the reality and accept that over what is actually the reality and propagate that as being the reality. I'm trying to see how it connects to lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride, and envy.
I think it will definitely have a direct relationship to illusion, because moha is specifically related to that. But yeah, he seems to touch on it more directly in the next verse, where the actual verse talks about hypocrisy and deceit. But I don't recall so much more from the poem.
Yeah, it's Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions that the anarthas, there's 4 categories of form, and the impious anartha he calls deceit as one of them. The deceit and he gives 2 things within one category, deceit and I can't remember the other one. But it's considered to be the emperor amongst all of the anarthas.
Thank you. So we'll definitely get into that a bit more in the next class as well. One of the things I wanted to touch upon is this idea kamadi. So when it's translated here, it's lust. But when we look at the commentary, it goes into all of these different details. And the reason for that, is that also the Sanskrit language has a particular process in it itself. So there's the direct words, but there's also what the words imply. So I can't remember the exact place where it is, but in the Bhagavatam, there's a particular verse, and it's translated, those who live in the village by the river Ganga, but it's translated as those who are pure-hearted. But the verse itself doesn't say pure-hearted. In the translation, it comes out. But to explain how it works, we understand that when you bathe in the Ganga, what happens to you? You get purified. So it's called the implied meaning. So there's a meaning and there's the implied meaning. When you look at the actual Sanskrit for that verse, it actually says that the village on the river Ganga. But you can't have a village on a river. Because it's just not practical. You couldn't have a village literally on the river, it would just sink into the water. So when the direct meaning doesn't make sense, you take the indirect meaning. Okay? The village by the river Ganga. But then you also take the implied meaning. If the village is by the river Ganga, it means that people in that village are taking bath in the Ganga every day. So what's implied is that they're pure-hearted. So when Prabhupada translates, he translates for meaning. Not literally. Translates for meaning. And that is, sometimes in our movement we have a disagreement with the scholars. Because the scholars say, well, you've changed this, right? This is not what the Sanskrit says. But actually our point is, that's exactly what's being said. Because our thing is that unless you translate for meaning, you will actually change what the verse is alluding to. And therefore, Krishna says, you can understand this rahasyam, this transcendental understanding, this transcendental secret. He says this to Arjuna, why? Bhakto sime saka, because you're my devotee and you're my friend.
Because you're not envious.
Exactly, non-envious. So our point is that only devotees can properly understand what is being given by Krishna. because one has to be of that tradition and understand that context, or you take it out of context. To give another example, imagine that, imagine someone comes from the past into the future, and they're reading something, and it says something like, the information, I got the information on my hard drive. Right? Now let's say that they don't understand what a hard drive is. They translate literally. So then they translate, I got the information on a very difficult journey. Right? A hard drive. But if they don't know, a hard drive is not referring, it's not literal. Hard drive, that word refers to a specific thing. Then what happens is when they translate, they actually change the meaning. Because they don't understand that word actually alludes to a particular thing. So this is a mystery of these translations. Therefore, Manashiksha, our devotional literatures, if you don't know the devotional culture, and if instead you try to just take word for word as a translation, you actually change the meaning.
As it is.
Yeah. As it is, absolutely. So there was, in Bhaktivedanta Manna, some scholars came to visit. And one of the scholars, he told the devotees, why don't you change the title of this book? Which was Bhagavad Gita. He said, what your Prabhupada seems to be implying is that his Bhagavad Gita is a proper Bhagavad Gita, and other people's Bhagavad Gitas are not proper Bhagavad Gitas. So the devotee humbly told him, said, Prabhupada isn't implying this. That's exactly what he's saying. That's exactly what he's saying. He said, actually, if you look at the purport, Prabhupada writes that at the time of going to print, there were over 700 editions of Bhagavad Gita. He's more or less saying they were all useless. Yeah. So this is the point. Bhagavad Gita, as it is, it requires someone who's in that tradition, who has that understanding. What's Krishna alluding to? What does he actually mean? Yeah. Jump. Please.
One scholar, they translate bhakti as karma, and that becomes their focus. Activities, but they don't connect the activities to devotion. So the actual translation, or the proper translation is, it's devotion, bhakti, not just karma. Karma has another meaning, and then therefore they imply the wrong meaning, and we have an understanding of what karma is, so it's not bhakti. Yeah. So that's their Gitas are like that. It's just karma.
So it can be these things, if they're not understood properly, can be translated in so many different ways, which actually take us away from what Krishna's actually, what he wants Arjuna to know. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting point. So again, Kamadi, lustfully, it means all the 6 enemies, of which lust is the beginning. So it's an interesting progression between verse 4 and verse 5. So in verse 4, the gross obstacles, right? So this idea of mundane talks, etc., the gross obstacles. Now, this verse 5, we're looking at more of the subtle obstacles, in terms of those things within the heart that become problematic. And as we said, from lust comes all these other enemies. Let's see. Now, this is also very interesting. Our anatas, they actually steal away the wealth of our bhakti. That's why in this verse it's talking about them as, what is it? Let's see. I've been attacked by the hideous gang of lust, who have bound my neck with the troublesome, dreadful ropes of wicked deeds. Okay? So what happens is we're cultivating a certain treasure within our heart. And these enemies, they actually take the treasure away. It's not spoken about so much, but it's possible for devotees to, in one sense, regress. To go backwards. If we're not properly building up the treasure of our wealth. Like that. And what tends to happen is if someone goes back into the material energy, they usually take on the behaviors that they had before they came to Krishna consciousness. So let's say someone's a hippie before they joined. When they leave, you see that their tendencies in that kind of area, they start to manifest again. So we have a wealth that we're building, and we have to protect that wealth. The protection comes by the association, the proper association of the devotees. It comes by the proper association directly, but also the association of the devotees through their teachings, through their example, and through their instructions. I repeat, through their teachings. When we associate, I know Maharaja has spoken about this a lot. Prabhupada says you can associate me through my books. So we can have this association by the reading. And don't think it's just it's a mundane thing. It's actually very, very deep association. By the reading, by the instructions. One stays connected to the spiritual master through the execution of the instructions. What did Guru Maharaj tell me to do? What did he tell me not to do? Why did he tell me to do it? You know, how will I go about executing that? And again, linking it to yesterday, you can see how it protects us, because all of these things, what kind of samskars will they strengthen? They'll strengthen the bhakti samskars. You can be in the world doing whatever you're doing, and you can be thinking, how am I going to use this in my spiritual master's service? How can I apply this in my guru's service? And even though you're in the world, you're actually strengthening your devotion at the same time. Like that. It's a meditation. So, I won't show the quote, but a friend of mine sent me this quote yesterday. And another March, I can't remember where it's from, but anyway, he sent me the actual point. So even the spiritual master will often think about the nature of the individual. I remember Marge telling me, we were in was it one of your disciples' retreats somewhere else in Europe, but just before I left, I paid obeisances to Marge, Slovenia. And I just asked him, I said, Marge, is there any last instruction for me? And then Marge started telling me, he said, Bhuta Bhavana, you're the kind of person, you need to find new ways to innovate, to bring Krishna to people. And you gave me the example of, old wine in new bottles. Yeah, and you gave me that example. And it's interesting, I spoke to Radha Maharaj. I think this was after speaking to you, and I asked him a different question. I said, what would my spiritual master, one of his disciples? And he gave me 4 things, and the first thing is exactly the point that you made. He said, find new and innovative ways to bring people to Krishna. That's the first thing he told me. And I was thinking that, you can be out in the world and you're thinking, right, how do we find new and interesting ways to spread the mission? And Prabhupada writes about this in at least one purple, about novel ways to share the mission. So it's so amazing. So you can be in the world, but you can meditate on how the instruction, how does this situation, how can I use this to do what I've been asked to do? And in that way, the situation itself does not actually cause us to come down, but rather we're going to engage that, because what is that? It's Krishna's energy. We can engage that situation in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it's very, very, very powerful if we understand how this works. How do we connect? And that's the point, you connect it to Krishna. How do I connect these things? And I also share that because Narottam Das Thakur, he explains how an artist can be engaged. So here this verse is talking about an artist. He says, for example, we have pride, but we can have pride that we have such a wonderful master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Our pride can be directed in that direction. Right? He says greed. We can be greedy for the association of Vaishnavas and greedy for Krishna Katha. So even though these enemies are there, if they're redirected and engaged in Krishna's service, they become elevated. So there again, there's a real spiritual practice, a real way of doing this. I just want to share 1 or 2 other things before we open up for questions. So, yeah. So, there's a story that was really good to share. If I can find the page. There's a story.
What page is it?
This, it's a story about Sanatana Goswami and the touchstone. Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. If not, I'll just give it in a very abbreviated form.
Yeah, it has Lord Shiva in it. Lord Shiva's in it.
Oh, okay. This is, but here what I read was, give me 1 second.
On the mountain,
I think this is a slightly different pastime.
Touchstone?
Yeah, this is when Sanatana Goswami had it, he's thrown it away.
Yeah, he was on that mountain.
Ah.
And this guy came to Lord Shiva. And look, he wanted Yeah, he came to Lord Shiva for a benediction. Lord Shiva sent him.
That's it, yeah. Yes, yes. Yes, that's the pastime. So basically, when this person comes to Sanatana Goswami, he actually basically is redirected. Well, you know, if you want this, there's a touchstone which is there. He's already thrown it away. And so the person takes it, but then he actually realizes, so hold on, if this person's thrown away this touchstone, he must have something higher. And so actually he realized, he throws the touchstone away actually, he throws it in the ocean or in the river.
No, he doesn't.
It doesn't? Oh.
He first comes to Sanatan, and then he says, I know you have something more valuable,
Yeah.
I want that. And Sanatan says, I can give you that, but first you have to throw it
Ah, okay.
first.
Yes, he throws it away after.
That was a prerequisite for
Yeah.
getting it,
Yes,
which is also connected to the whole process of bhakti.
yes. So the point is that he realizes that this person has something higher. And he realizes, Maharaj said, he has to let go of the lower to get the higher. And by doing so, he then becomes elevated as well through that association. But the key point is that through the association of devotees, we see a living example of a higher taste. Yeah. Through the association of devotees, we see a living example of the higher taste. And in that higher taste, it impresses upon us that there is something greater than material sense gratification. There's something greater that we can experience, something greater that we can be about, if we're ready to actually pay the price for that. So we wanted to share that as well. Let's just see if there's anything else before we open up for questions. I think we'll stop there. We covered most of the points we wanted to cover. So yes, questions, comments before we go. Anyone? See some hands? Can we pass that off?
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. This was again a very interesting class, and my question would be connected to both today's class and yesterday's class, because today you also spoke about association of devotees and hearing from them, and yesterday you also touched this topic of hearing like online digital classes or personally. And I was thinking about it, sometimes it happens that devotees want to hear online class from a senior devotee rather than go to a Srimad Bhagavatam class personally from a junior or from peers, and how should we approach this topic?
I'm going to ask Maharaj if he has a comment on that first.
You mean that person's living in the temple and then they decide not to go to the Bhagavatam? Is that?
Sometimes, not even in the same town or city.
I don't think it's an obligation. You have to go to the temple to hear the Bhagavatam class. But if you could, that would be the preference. I wouldn't make that a principle of this is right and this is wrong. I think it's a matter of consciousness to choose. But what you're saying is that it gives support to the devotees who are giving class, like being there.
Also that, because once this was asked from Shivaram Maharaja in a podcast.
And what did he say?
He spoke about it that if everyone just wants to listen to online classes, then there will be no morning classes. But it was one aspect, and I was thinking about it.
Well, yeah, that's the absolute understanding, but sometimes it's not always convenient. It's like we want to go to the temple, but maybe we live 2 miles away, and not 2 miles away, but 2 hours away. So that may not be practical. if we're living in the temple, we should follow the process. Yes, 100%. That I agree with.
Can I add something, Guru Maharaj?
Yeah.
His Holiness Niranjan Swami was asked this question: which part of the morning program, I don't have time, I really have a hard time, which part of the morning program can I absolutely not miss? And Maharaj said, it's the morning class. Because that's the time when you get to be with devotees, you get to hear the philosophy, you get to clarify your doubts, and you hear the questions as well as the answers of other devotees, which sharpens your understanding. So Maharaj thought that you won't get all that through online class because you're a passive listener, you're not engaged as much as if you were in person at that class. So he said that one should try to attend the morning class.
I agree. But I don't agree in all circumstances.
Right, we were, yeah.
So the point I would make is that we should do the best that we can. That's the point. We should do the best that we can.
We should be sincere.
Yeah, the sincere. So it's like do the best that you can, because there's a point that Krishna sees. It's one thing what we're doing for Krishna. He sees what we're actually holding back. When I was in Mayapur a few years ago, I spoke to one of my godbrothers. And he told me that there was a situation where they'd done some book distribution marathon, and my spiritual master was reading out the scores, and many of the devotees, they distributed some books, but maybe not the largest number. And this godbrother of mine, he distributed more books than everyone else. So when everyone else's scores were read out, they were glorified. When his score was read out, my spiritual master said nothing to him. And he was upset. And he told me, he said later on, he said, Guru Maharaj came to me and he said, I know you were upset that I didn't say anything even though you've done more. And then my spiritual master said to him, he said, what you have to understand is these other devotees, they may have not have distributed as many books, but they were doing the best that they can. He said, I know that you could have done a lot more. So it looks externally one way, but actually it's according to what your capacity is. So the point is, to Maharaj's point, is sincerity. It's actually doing the best that we can. And it's not always measured externally, but rather the spiritual master can know, Krishna can know, well, I saw what you did, but I know what you're capable actually of. So from what you're capable of, is this the best that you can do? That's how we can consider it.
Perfect understanding.
Thank you for the encouragement, Maharaj. I saw Radhabhakti had a question. Could you pass it on?
I'll just yell it. This might be a silly one, but how do we know if we're sincere in trying our best?
How do we know that we're sincere in trying our best? Would you like to comment, Maharaj? Personal, please.
When we're one-pointed on what we're doing, that's one of the qualities. We put our complete attention and energy into the activity. And we also put our devotion into it. In other words, the more of the characteristics that make up the activity are put into the activity, that will understand how sincere we are. If we're focused but there's no devotion, then we might say it's lacking something essential. I'd say everything: attention, devotion, and wanting to please as the result of our activities. You see, sometimes people get so focused on something, even if you talk to them, they don't know you're around. If you can get like that in your devotional service, then that's it. Nothing else around you has any, really relevant to what you're doing. One-pointedness. I think Shiva Ramanuja mentions that in his book. What is it called?
Yes.
Eka something.
Yeah.
Not Vrata, but Eka. He talks about he gives the example, I want to increase the quality of my chanting. So I make that my focus every time I sit down and chant, with the desire to improve the quality and the devotion in my chanting. It's in that book.
Candramauli.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember the egg. It's egg or something.
Egg is something.
I think it's Ekagrata.
Ekagrata, that's it. Yes.
What is it called?
Ekagrata. Yes.
Ekagrata, yeah.
Yes.
There's 4 principles, and that one seems to be the essential one. We get distracted. But if you're getting distracted, it means you're really not putting all of your attention into what you're doing. Or all of your energy.
So, just to also share something on this topic. How do we know that we're sincere? I think it's also something, there's also something that comes by some introspection, like that.
That's the question, how do we know we're sincere?
Yes.
You know the definition of sincerity? The history of it?
Oh, sincerity, is it that word?
Yeah, what is it? Where does it come from?
Without wax, is it marble?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sculpting. Those who, that word came, you mentioned it, it's a Latin word, right? To make that form out of that block of wax, ideal, and the focus on that, to do that. I mean, if you're sculpting, you just like everything is fine-tuned, with one pointed attention. So that's an interesting definition. It's like creating something artistic.
And you know, we also, when I first came to Krishna consciousness, there's one devotee, really, really wonderful devotee, and he was explaining that if you do the best you can in the situation you're in, then Krishna gives you more capacity. So we can just try and fine tune. I would also say,
the thing is that if you're attached to the result, that minimizes the quality of the result. Because Krishna will come in and do most of the work.
yeah.
But if you're attached to the result, it also blocks his mercy.
So what happens is that if we try our best to do it, but also in a joyful way, then Krishna will get more and more involved. I remember hearing this, that how one of the ways in which we know what Krishna wants, echoing something that Maharaja just said, if we try and do whatever we're doing with as much devotion as possible, then Krishna gets more involved. And he sees, oh, they're trying, and they're actually trying to offer it to me. Okay, you wanted to offer it to me, then he'll get more involved, and it'll go in a particular direction, but joyfully and in a positive way. So it's that with the enthusiasm and trying to do it as a loving offering, because then we feel the heart's full, and Krishna's also pleased. Does that make sense? Yeah. Last question. Okay.
Hi Krishna. You spoke about proper association. From your observation, where do we go wrong in association with devotees?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we have expectations of the devotees that are not aligned with what the scripture says we should expect. So we come in with our own ideas of how devotees should be. And, for example, you could say that someone could assume that because someone's been around a long time, they must be very, very exalted. But you won't get that anywhere in the scripture that says just because you've been around a long time that they're automatically something's like that. But you'll see that the way that devotees act, but he's been around for so many years. It's like, and was there a quote from scripture anywhere that said that it's nothing to do with it? But we carry our own conception into devotional life, and we're not aware of that. How much it causes an issue.
I know one senior devotee who I think has the right understanding of association. And wherever he is, he's in that one mood. how to serve. Not what can I get out of this or how can I enjoy this. In each and every situation he thinks, how can I serve? And you can see when he acts, he's always in that mood. So if you're in association devotees, you think, how can I serve? And if it's nothing comes, then you just, if you're here in class, your service is to do the class. In other words, it takes some intelligence to understand how to serve in every situation. And that intelligence develops as you practice that. You can see. Sometimes you see what devotees need, and then you somehow make that happen. And that's the way of serving devotees. To be observant and watch the devotees and see if I can serve this particular person in some way or other. I know a devotee like that. I won't mention his name. I don't want to put him on an embarrassing situation because he's very humble. But that's his mood.
Beautiful. And that, thank you for the Maharaj. That will lead to a very blissful spiritual life. The linking to that often is because also we want something from the devotees. Like that. So it's like, I was reading...
It'll come. You'll get it anyway.
Yeah.
You'll get it.
I was listening to one class just before I came here. And it was one guru, sannyasi in ISKCON, and he was mentioning how even sometimes people come to the class and they're looking to be entertained. Like that. So it's a class, but the spirit is one of enjoyment. It's like, come on, tell me, when are you going to tell a joke? Like, what's wrong with you? We'll add some stories, but again, I'm coming, but actually maybe we'll talk about this more in the next verse, and the next verse really gets into this. But they're coming for something, rather than coming to serve. And so it makes it it changes the focus, but it's often very subtle. But actually the difficulty is that same enjoying spirit spills over into other areas of life as well. And it causes us to not get the full benefit that we could get.
Yeah, I got chastised. It was good. But the person who chastised me, it was generous. I came to a class with a very senior devotee and I was thinking, I'm going to learn some of the points he says so I can use it in my preaching. And the first thing he said when he began the class, don't come simply to get ideas on how you can preach. And I just shrunk back in my seat. All right, you got me.
Yeah. So association, I love the way the Maharaj put it. If we can go in that mood, we say, Prabhu, it means you're my master. I'm actually here I'm here for your service. And if we can approach in that mood, then everything comes to us. Krishna's providing. I will also echo this point. I think it's very important. Also, it takes some intelligence to know how to serve. It's really important because linking that, I think that that's also another issue. But I don't know. This is the way you serve this devotee best. But this devotee, you should serve him in a different way, like that. But it's all part of becoming situated as a madhyama, as an intermediate devotee. I actually understand the devotees properly, I understand myself properly, I understand how to serve in different situations. And then spiritual life it's a lot smoother in that regard. I think
another class.
Yes, okay. So maybe when we have the next class.
It wasn't a question, it was just adding to that point of...
There wasn't 4 options?
No. You were saying we need to know how to... You were saying we need to know how to serve individual people differently. And I think that's the foundation of our movement, is it's personal. I think you've made this point before, I got this from you, is... Krishna consciousness is personal because Krishna is a person. So when we're serving, we have to serve them as a person, as an individual. And that's the distinction between our philosophy and what we do, and that's why it's so unique.
Otherwise, it's impersonalism.
Yeah, otherwise it is impersonalism, absolutely, yeah. And it happens a lot. It happens a lot. So we'll end here. I know we have a few other things to do, but thank you very much. Thank you, Marge, for sharing. No, thank you for sharing, Marge. Thank you for sharing.
I had to kind of control myself. you just touched so many, so many points. I just had to shut up.
Okay,
I'll
so
do better next class.
we'll stop there, and we'll continue, I think, in an hour's time for the next